Okay, let's dive right into this. Let's get this boring part out the way. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to get this ready for paint, and this is probably the most important stage. Most boring, but the most important stage. So if you want your paint job to last, this is the bit that you need to pay attention to. So all we're going to do is, we've got a scourer, 2 different scourers. We're just going to get in all those little nooks and crannies, go over the whole thing, give it a good rub down with this rough side, and all that's going to do is it's going to give the paint something to stick to. It's just going to rough that surface up just a little bit more, and the paint will stick. So it won't matter at the end. People always say, what do you give your coat, what do you give your gun a final coat of? We will give it a matte lacquer at the end, but that's mainly just to seal all your weathering coats in. That's not going to stop the paint chipping and scratching. It's what you do at the start that's going to help your paint job last. So with your scourer, I'm just going to go all over it. Take the mag out. Take that off. I might as well take this off. So again, this is always the boring bit. I never look forward to this. There's nothing really to show for it. But if you do this properly, then your paint job will last a hell of a lot longer. There's nothing worse than, especially if you're doing stencils, and if you haven't done this stage, you come to peel all your stencils off and it lifts all your paint with it. This one's actually better than that one. You might not notice it on camera, but the surface has just gone a little bit duller. And to the touch, you're not going to notice it. But it's going to give the paint something to adhere to a little bit better than if you were just going straight onto this. In this case, the polymer. We're not going to be using a primer on this one. We're just going straight in with the rattle cans, the colours. On our next paint job, which is going to be a lot more work, we'll be priming that one. But with this one, we're not using a primer. We're going to go for that sandbox look, as people say, as if someone's just grabbed a couple of rattle cans out in the field and given it a paint job to break up the outline of the thing. This used to be probably the most popular paint finish I used to be asked for, especially when things like Lone Survivor, American Sniper and all those films came out. Suddenly everyone was seeing the guns people were using with that tan spray job. So if you are going to do things like this, especially when it comes to the weathering, just trawl the internet, look for images of the real things that have been used out and about, see where they pick up the weathering, see where the paint gets worn away. And we're going to try and recreate that to some extent on this. Bit strange doing this, guys and girls. I'm used to just doing this. I normally have music playing in the background, or a podcast or an audio book, so You're going to have to bear with me on these videos, especially to start off with. Something totally new. I'm not used to doing this. Hate talking to camera. Hate the sound of my own voice. Although our lass would totally disagree with that. But hopefully, as with most things, the more I do it, the better I'll get. This one's probably not going to be the slickest, but at least it should show you how to do this very basic paint job and get the type of look that you'll have been seeing me post online for the last couple of years. Give the mag a good rub. Again, you can just see how that shiny surface, you might be able to see all the little tiny scratches. That's what your paint's going to stick to better. This is better than the blue one, just because it lets you get in all the recesses and nooks and crannies a little bit better than the scouring pad. So all these are, I think these are meant for you washing up. Nothing exciting. So there it is, rubbed down. That's stage one, done and dusted. So we've got it all rubbed down. We're getting it ready for paint. And now the second thing we want to do is we just want to stop the paint getting into anywhere it's not supposed to get. So in this case, we're going to pack out the mag well. We're going to put something down the barrel, and importantly, we're going to put some paint, some tape, sorry, around this trigger. Sometimes after I've done the scouring phase, what I will do is I'll go over the whole thing with this sort of stuff. Silicone remover, panel wipe. I get most of my supplies from a car body shop suppliers. This stuff, it'll just get rid of any grease on the surface from your skin, or if it's came out the mould and there's some lubricant left over from mould release agents. Give everything a good wipe over. Not going to bother in this one, just because I don't want you guys that are just going to do this basic paint job thinking it's something else you've got to go out and find. But especially in the next one, where there's going to be a lot of stencils, a lot of colour layers going on top of each other, I will be using this. I'm very nearly out. Chances are I'll either buy another tin of this, or I've watched guys online recently using IPA, isopropanol alcohol. Does the same sort of thing. You can dilute it down, and that's just going to give you a nice clean surface. But in this instance, we're just going to dive in, get things masked off, and then we should be ready for paint. So I'll get rid of any dust. And this doesn't take any kind of finesse, because it is going to be that rough and ready paint job. So all you're doing is getting some masking tape, and it doesn't have to be any kind of special masking tape for this one. We're not bothered about getting sharp, crisp edges when we take it off. The whole point of this is just to stop the spray paint getting inside, getting into your internals. This is only a worry or something to think about if, as in this case, we're spraying the thing while it's all together. On the next one that you'll see me doing, the items are actually being fully stripped down, so there aren't any internals, so you don't have to worry about this. There's nothing to worry about getting in the barrel or the mag well, because there isn't any internals there. But in this instance, we need to be a little bit careful. So whatever you want, blue roll, toilet roll, kitchen roll, an old rag, pack that mag well out, stop anything getting in there, and roll some up, stick it down the barrel. What I might do is put some masking tape inside the ejection port. These are just little things. I've been doing this 10 years now, so these are just little things that I've picked up over 10 years of doing it. Tape doesn't always stick very well inside here. We just try to give, and that should be us done. Tell you what we will do. We will mask off the top of the mag. And again, we don't have to be exact with this, because it is going to be that rough and ready look that we go for. Again, I get my tapes from a local car body shop suppliers. It's a lot cheaper in the volumes that I buy it in, and it does give a nice clean edge when you come to peel it off. I've used cheap stuff in the past, and this still isn't expensive, but the cheap stuff, when you peel it off, you can get a jagged edge, or it might lift your paint. So there we go. We are ready to start applying our first coat of colour. So I nearly forgot, move that out of the way, before we start applying our colour, this is going to be our first little gear tech hack. So this is part of the way that we're going to get that wear and tear, and all I'm using, and I've used this an awful lot, as you can see, not got a great deal left, but this is baby cream, zinc and castor oil cream. Pretty much any kind of cream will do. I've seen guys use toothpaste, you can use Mascol that you can buy from your local hobby shops. I've had this, bearing in mind my youngest lad turned 19 the other day, and this was what we used when he was little. It's a little bit, it's getting on a bit, but all this is going to do, we're going to splodge this on all those high spots again. If you look at reference photos, see where things that have been used get wear and tear. This is going to give us those larger chips, and we will go over it when all the colour's on with little wire brushes and things to get those smaller chips and scratches. But where we think we're going to get the most wear and tear, and where we don't want the paint to stick to, we're just going to splodge this on. Just a really old paintbrush. You can do it with various things. Nail files, like those little emery boards, that'll just give you a different kind of texture and the way it goes on. And when it comes to, when you wipe it off, you'll see. So all we're going to do is think of where we get a lot of wear and tear. So on your high spots, we're just going to splodge this on. Don't go too crazy, because like I say, we will be going over it with wire brushes, but around the trigger, where you just think people's hands are going to be constantly coming into contact with the paint job. along the magwell. And again, don't paint it on, because you don't want that perfectly smooth finish. All these little bits that you can see where it's been splodged on, they're going to give you a nice chipping effect when you come to wipe the paint off. So if you think where people's fingers will be constantly coming into contact with things, slings on the sling mounts, charging handle, that's going to get a lot of wear and tear. Again, don't cover it. This is just going to be the first initial weathering technique. It's not so much speeding it up, it's just a little hack. Rather than having to go in and do the whole thing with wire brushes, this just gives. Don't paint it on too thin. If you were making, if you're a military modeler or you're doing Warhammer and things, and you're using hobby paints and you're putting down very thin coats, then a thin coat of this, or Mascol or whatever you use, I probably do, but the stuff that we use, and we're going to be putting 2 coats of each colour down, so you're going to end up with quite a thick coat on. So you do want this stuff to be on fairly thick, otherwise it won't work. Especially around there, your sling mount. Bayonet lug. The barrel I won't bother with, because that will weather up nicely with the wire brush. Go around the other side. And again, you're just looking at areas, those high points that you just think are constantly going to come into contact with either clothing, if it's slung, or where people grip the thing, where people's fingers constantly come into contact. All those little high points. Again, this is just, we'll refine it later with the wire brushes, but this just speeds it up slightly, especially areas like this where normally there's a lot of wear to the paint. Where the stock is constantly sliding back and forth, but we'll get some nice effects with the wire brush there later on. The riz rail, obviously with this one it hasn't got a riz rail at the front. The forks over it. BZ gave me this when I told them I wanted something just to do a very basic, very easy paint job to show people. I grabbed this one of the more budget ones they do. The next one that I'll be showing you guys is again from BZ Tactical here in the UK. That's one of their KWA range. Done a lot of KWAs for BZ Tactical, and that one's going to be a lot more in depth. What we will do, we do seem to have a lot of dust in there. Just get rid of some of that dust. Hopefully when I'm doing this and future videos, I'm going to try and explain what I'm using, because there's nothing worse than if you're watching someone that you're following on YouTube or wherever it is, and then suddenly they start using something and they don't tell you what it is. You think, well, how the hell have you achieved that effect, or how have you done that? So hopefully, again, this is my first video. It's going to be the first one going on my Patreon channel. I don't even know if there's the option there for people to comment, ask questions. This is all a big steep learning curve. So I would say for that, that's probably as much as we need on that. And then on the carry handle, again, there probably wasn't a need to do as much on the riz rail on the top because the carry handle is going to be attached, but someone might want to take it off and add an attachment. So whenever I do this sort of thing, I make sure I do strip it down if they've got M-lock rails on that type of front end. I always take things off and spray it all separately, just in case in the future I think actually I'm not too fussed on where that M-lock rail is anymore. I want to move that, and there'd be nothing worse than if they took it off and there was no paint underneath. So again, just thinking about where this thing had come into contact. There's no point putting chips and things under there because it's not really the type of place that's going to get chipped and scratched, because it's not really going to come into contact with anything. If you drop this on the ground, it's not really going to come into contact with anything there. But on all these high points, especially on things like this, where people are constantly screwing and unscrewing things on and off, changing these dials, screw heads, you'll see when we come to wipe this off with a rag and a scourer, it does give that instant. People have always asked, how do I get the chips and the scratches? Bit on the mag. Again, don't put it on too thin. With the spray paint, you are going to get fairly decent coverage, thicker coats than if you were doing this for a model that you're making, where it's your paints are diluted down and they're going in very thin coats. Just be totally random. Mags are going to get a lot of wear and tear, constantly in and out of mag pouches. We dropped on the ground. And the stock, we'll do a little bit on the stock. I'll probably give this more weathering with the wire brush and scourers, depending on whether you're a lefty or a righty. If you think about where it's going to come into contact with your cheek, or more so if it's slung and it's coming into contact with your clothing. This is a very stark effect that this gives. This, once you wipe this off, it's straight down to that underlying dark black base coat. Whereas if we go in afterwards with a scourer, you can get a more feathered effect where it looks like paint's being worn away rather than chipped away. But things like this area, and I usually, depending on if I'm thinking, right, whoever was holding this was right-handed or left-handed, so if it's a right-handed, I'll do less weathering on this side, and all these are totally over the top and exaggerated 9 times out of 10 in the paint jobs that I do, compared to something that was sprayed and used in everyday life, which part of that a little bit of theatre and storytelling, different textures, just going to make it pop and look a little bit different. Again, if you just look at the contours of this along this line, that's your highest point. So that's probably where it's going to come into contact with things the most, and that's where you're going to get the most wear and tear. But we will feather that in so it's not such a stark chip or a scratch once we put the colours on and wipe this lot off. Let's do a little bit on this. Again, try to avoid those recesses on this sort of front end, because that probably wouldn't come into contact with it too much. But especially on the bottom, if you think where people are gripping it, then that is going to get a hell of a lot more wear than at the top. But we're not really, don't worry, this is not going to be your final weathering stage. This is only a very early one. So when you come to wipe this off, you think, well, that doesn't look like there's enough. We're going to go back in with the wire brush, the scourers, and we're just going to add to that. Down and dirty. Pretty hard to fill the silencers when you're doing these things. And if it is silent, that's not going to be a very interesting watch. So I think that will do us for this stage. Pretty much. I think that'll do. Anything else we need to do later on, we'll go back in with other techniques and add to that general wear and tear. But yeah, that's looking pretty good.